Hello and welcome to Season 5 of Emotive Pixels. This is a one game at a time video game podcast, and this is the beginning of a new chapter. In 2025, we're going to be playing and discussing AAA video games to see what relevance they have in a world with such amazing technology at the hands of indie developers and such uncertainty and non-risk-taking in the big publishers. I'm your host, Nate, and I've been in the indie space way too long, and I'm peeking over the fence into the big leagues to see if there's any life over there or if it's all just risk-avoidant sequels and violence. I'm joined today by Craig, spokesperson of the other side, lifetime PlayStation fan, and dare I say it, PC indie curious. And Ren, who is honestly maybe more into obscure cool shit than I am, considering their love of retro gaming and their relentless content demands of streaming. First of all, Craig, why are you committing to a year of insanely long big games like this? And what do you think of where AAA games are at?
Hitting off with a big old question. I guess I've explored the last few years within the podcast of just kind of bouncing around and checking out what's cool, seeing what's happening across a multitude of games from indies to the larger AAA games. And when I was reflecting on the games that I played mostly in my own personal time last year, I was noticing the trend towards AAA games, but not exclusively. And I wanted to take a more critical lens to what those games are doing and what they're saying about the medium and how relevant are AAA games still within an industry that is mostly defined by live service games at this point, and other niche categories that have exploded into popularity, whether that's MOBAs or, like I said, the free-to-play games and things of that nature. Like, where does large tentpole experiences fit within that, and what does it have to say about the industry, and what lessons are being learned from the indie space, and what ones aren't? So I think that's kind of the thesis on what I want to explore through our large AAA games. But it's funny since we're not starting the season off with a AAA game, but here we are.
Yeah, the audience can blame me for that. We're going to get into that. That's a subject that makes me slightly ragey, but apparently I'm wrong, so we're going to talk about it. Ren, where are you at with big budget, fancy schmancy titles? Do you mostly play indie, big games, old games, new games? Where are you at?
So I kind of been playing for making up for lost time, honestly. I don't think I've played a AAA game since it came out, probably since like Call of Duty Black Ops, and I mean one. Yeah,
and they released the 6th of those last year.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not that I have any like aversion to AAA games. Personally, I'm more into puzzle games, indie games. Like, I'm not really first-person shooter kind of inclined. I tried my damnedest to beat this game. But yeah, the difficulty scaling definitely made me remember that there's a reason that I stick to visual novels and match 3 games. But I don't want to say that I did not have a good time playing this. I guess as far as my knowledge when it comes to AAA is like you were saying, classics, where it's like I kind of jump back to BioShock, but I'm playing it years later. And so as far as just like as they're coming out, I've seen a lot of failure in the news, and so I'm very curious to kind of see for myself as to what the hype is all about with these. And don't beat yourself up too much about it not being a AAA game, because you could have told me it was a AAA game and I would not have known any better.
Yeah, you and I are in the same boat there. Craig, are there a lot of AAA puzzle games?
No, I would say there's a lot of AAA games that include puzzle mechanics, but I wouldn't say there's primarily AAA puzzle games. I think the closest you'd probably get to that is The Witness. But that's probably...
Or like
Talos Principle also starts to go into that if you go traditional.
Surely that's not AAA. If this isn't, that can't.
No, but if you're starting to like peek over the fence, then I think you start to get into that conversation. Hitman's a really good one. Hitman is, Hitman I think could be quantified as a puzzle game,
and therefore Indiana Jones. Even more so.
Well, if we just start to consider immersive games, I think we're we might be jumping the shark on what that looks like.
My stereotype is that AAA games are often violent and have a lot of kind of pathos in their storytelling, like overblown emotions, kind of melodramatic plots. And I totally forgot about the live service thing. I guess in my headspace, most AAA games now are live service, but I don't even know if that's true, since
I don't think so.
Die out so fast and only a few of them are allowed to survive, really.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're gathered today to inspect the first game of this new season. Yes, we hear you out there. Actually, it's not a AAA game, it's AA. And hey, that's what I want to get into this season. What are these categories? What is it?
It's actually an indie game.
What can Wait, hold on. This, I think, has been released. You saying that Dave the Diver can't be an indie game because it's published by a big publisher certainly then applies to this game.
I would like to offer a correction to what you were trying to layer on to me from saying that.
Mm-hmm.
Dave the Diver was funded through its development through a team that had access to millions and millions and millions of dollars, and had big publishing backing. This game, Immortals of Aveum, was not funded by EA, but published by EA, but funded by Ascendant Studios. So
you're saying swooping in at the last second for the publisher deal does not diminish from the indie quality of this game because they had to bend over and get the funding as they went along?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would like to retittle the retittle of the rebuttal.
So we're going to have to start making a checklist here, like the Supreme Court defining porn.
Right.
As we go through the season. So this is an important starting point.
It's like, yeah. If Nexon is the company that was behind Dave the Diver as well. So, which is a massive, like 7,000 employee company in South Korea.
What is Immortals of Aveum? Immortals of Aveum is a magic shooter published by EA's original publishing imprint, and apparently only published and nothing else. Thank you, Craig. It was deemed enough of a commercial failure for the studio to be shut down shortly after launch, despite kind of somewhat good reviews.
The studio's not shut down.
I thought it was close. I thought the whole thing was that this game failed.
Shut down.
The game failed. Sorry, I'm just destroying your entry point here.
That's great, but
the studio shortly thereafter ended up laying off half of the studio and diminished to about 40 employees. And then about 6 months later, they laid off an additional 30 people.
Okay.
But as it stands now, it looks like a skeleton crew of like 10 people is still working with Brett Robbins.
Okay, so the creative founder is still there? All right, so I
as
guess
of last I checked,
99.99% of the studio was shut down.
Yeah. I guess by AAA standards in these years, that's not bad. But
yeah,
it's
almost everyone lost their job instead of everyone.
Yeah, it's almost a shutdown. A shutdown. Yeah, okay.
I'm just going to keep actuallying you throughout this episode.
It's like saying that everybody is in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, but nobody talking about Waluigi. So.
Not wrong.
It's
almost there.
Okay, so let's see if Craig disagrees with this sentence. It's basically an FPS with shades of Ikaruga color switching.
It's such...
What the fuck is Ikaruga?
I saw this before, and I was like, is this really where he's going to start this thing off
That's
at?
What I think. Is that not what you think?
That is a broad interpretation of Ikaruga.
What do you think Ikaruga is about? The shooting? Like the shmup category thing?
I think that the alternating colors, but also the alternating colors affect the damage that you can take, which that has no effect within Immortals of Aveum.
Well, for one, are you sure of that? Because I wasn't fully sure of the mechanics in this game until never.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally fair. But there is you have a shield and things of that nature that you can utilize. The other thing that I would say comes from an Ikaruga-like would be that damage can't happen unless you're using the same color, where in this game it's just more effective to destroy enemies. I think there's some shields and things of that nature, right, that you do need to color match.
That's one of my topics. We're going to be talking more about that. So it's not an Ikaruga-like, or maybe it's like as much of an Ikaruga-like as this studio got shut down. Let's leave it there. This game has a story. You're a boy who grew up in some sort of mega project slum bridge that's invaded by a bad mage army. You lose your best friend. You're recruited into the good side's mage army core. You fight on the side of good until you learn that maybe it's not good. And then you discover that your best friend is the second in command of the bad army. And then you come to an uneasy truce as you defeat the definitely bad guy at the head of the other side together, while realizing the morally gray nature of your side and what might be a metaphor for environmental exploitation or nuclear disarmament. Do you agree with that story summary?
Thoughts.
Craig? And Ren?
I concur.
Okay, yeah. Well, we're 3 or 4 pillars into the podcast, and Craig agrees, so that's exciting.
Let's roll.
Round of applause.
Do you have anything more to say about who made this, Craig? Where did this Brett come from?
Yeah, so I will mention, so Ascendant Studios was a new studio. This is the first and only game that they have released. It was led by industry veteran Brett Robbins, and he's someone that's been around since the PS1 era. Started at Crystal Dynamics, worked on Gex, the Gecko, if anyone remembers those games. He moved over to EA, actually, and was working on a couple of different games there, from a James Bond game, and then was creative director on Dead Space. After Dead Space, he ended up becoming creative director at Sledgehammer Games, which is related to Ren's early entry into AAA gaming, which would be, or previous conversation about it, which is the Call of Duty games. So he worked on 3 of those as the creative director before starting up Ascendant Studios.
Wow.
That makes a lot of sense.
He's been pretty EA adjacent.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's an interesting kind of career arc and working on a whole bunch of different types of games. But I did think it was interesting that it ended up kind of slingshotting back, but probably makes sense that he had relationships there that he could probably help at least get into the door when trying to get a conversation about publishing.
Super cool.
Yeah, it's almost like an attraction to virality if you look at the pattern of games he chose.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably, I guess we're jumping ahead 5 episodes, but that's probably what you kind of have to do at this point in the game, right? You know, you've got to make
Maybe.
something that's going to stick and get out there, especially if you're starting new IP like this.
Yeah. And I think that's something that I'm sure we'll cover throughout the conversation here is, what does it look like to try and launch new IP, and at what scale can you effectively do that?
Yeah, definitely.
Do we know the budget of this game?
No, there's been rumors from some of the reporting and some developers that have left that said that there's somewhere around $40 to $60 million in development, and then another $40 million in marketing, but unsure how accurate that is. Some other people had put it at about $80 million in development cost, and then another $40 million in marketing.
Do we know what like an Indiana Jones cost or a Horizon Zero Dawn, or
in the hundreds of millions?
And that's like over 100 into the 2 and beyond?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's very supportive of... Do you think budget factors into what is a AAA game? I mean, like, obviously it does, but are there AAA games that have cost less and double that have cost more?
So I think cost is one of the elements that help like quantify what is a AAA game. I think the number of developers doesn't directly equal cost, but the number of people that are working on it, and also like where it fits within the marketing and that sort of activity as well.
Yeah, the marketing seems like a big portion of it.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's open things up with our 20 words. Who wants to go first?
I will go first.
What you got?
Spartan kicked out of the sales charts. Its fate was decided. The Everwar continues, yet our war has just begun.
Ren, what do you got?
Mine's really cut and dry because I'm just so over this game. It's a graphically beautiful game with overwhelming potential and inspiration from great predecessors, ruined by generational humor and overcomplication of gameplay.
And I have, what is AA? What is AAA? Is fantasy better as games than books? Am I in Romania? Wait, no. Italy? That's our 20.
Excellent.
Those are all going to...
I wish I could be in any of those places.
Well, we're going to... All context will be explained, I assume, with all of our comments. Let's talk about the story. So I kind of described it up top. Did any of us think that our friend What's-Her-Face was actually dead when she got blown off into the abyss?
Nope.
Luna.
Yeah.
Honestly, I just kind of forgot about her. I was like, oh, all right, the kind of classic like hero's tale out for revenge type scenario. And so from that standpoint, when she did come back, I was like, oh, she is alive. But after she like quote unquote perished in the beginning, I definitely didn't give it any more thought as to like, oh, I wonder how she's going to show back up or what her return arc's going to be. I was like, oh, all right, well, now Jack has motivation to join the army and do his thing.
Ren, what'd you think when that happened?
So when the scene initially happened, I mean, one, I liked the other housemates, and so with her and listening,
Harry Potter.
Yeah, pretty much. I actually only remembered Fife and Babs. The third one was Injured Snow Globe Kid. That's literally all I wrote for him that I can remember. I don't feel bad. But literally, I wrote down drops into the void after one hit. Sus. Yeah, like literally, it was like the
absolutely nailed it.
Like the most pathetic little hit into the seemingly endless void underneath that nobody's seen the bottom of. And I was just like, okay, she's gonna be the like in the other army and everything. And even when I saw the hair of the person that she ends up being,
the hand,
I literally was like, are you fucking kidding me? I was like, and I feel like even the game knows that you know, because at the point where you find it out, he even literally, Jack says, please don't be you. And I was like,
does he actually say that? No, it's funny.
That is verbatim what he says.
That's very funny.
I'm very, if I seem very heated this episode, it's because I've been grinding this game out all day and I'm very upset. I'm just so angry at this point. Which, you know, maybe that's why it's a AAA game. It makes me want to commit violence.
It's still not a AAA game.
Okay, well, I'm going to add that to the spreadsheet. I'm saying
that's the justification.
That's what would pass for like
that. So even though it doesn't have AAA
bona fides,
all of the checklists off it, it makes me want to commit violence. Like millions of dollars worth of violence. That in Minecraft, not for real.
I feel like Luna that's such a good example of me being like, boy, I should really be paying more attention. Because if I'd been thinking at all, I would have kind of put that together. Because the game, like you said, Ren, I think does want you to figure that out.
I love that both Nate and I are the people here that are like plot and just like whoo, right over the head.
Meanwhile, I'm like taking notes of every little bit of everything. I don't even want to get into it yet for a character we'll talk about later. But
I don't like. I don't dislike the plot. I mean, the plot was big enough to fit or small enough to fit in my head. I was never really confused about what was happening.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think it was a bad plot. It's clearly I think we're probably going to get into it, but it was a metaphor for, I thought nuclear disarmament, but then it kind of became like environmental exploitation. And I guess it's kind of both. I don't know.
Yeah.
I hadn't gone in from the nuclear aspect of it, but I definitely was going in at it from the like destruction of natural resources, or like living within balance within the ecosystem is something that like humans are presented with and then immediately exploit it.
Question for you guys. Have either of you played Final Fantasy VII?
Yes. Although, no. But I've played the remake. I have not actually played the PS1 version, which is
same
I'm
story
deeply
beats.
saddened to admit on podcast.
It's okay. Same story beats.
Yeah.
But the whole like the life force and the wound growing and everything, it just made me think of so many tying between. Even Saren reminded me a lot of the Sector 7 slums. And like everything is like having a hierarchy level of like, if you don't have magic, then you're lesser than, which actually makes me think of an anime I'm watching recently.
Which one?
But Mashal.
Okay. I don't know, but I'm sure the people know.
Yeah, Mashal is a world where if you do not have magic, which is a sign that is essentially a mark on your body, you're killed. If you do not have magic, you are dead.
So it's
basically the premise is that this one kid is super fucking strong, and he doesn't have magic, but he's stronger than everyone else because he's just been training in the woods forever. So in a way, it's like, if you don't have magic, you're seen as these lightless. You're seen as lower class.
There's a lot in common with Final Fantasy 16 too. I mean, what you're mentioning there is the inverse of Final Fantasy 16, but Final Fantasy 16 is a story about people who have magic have a brand. In that game's case, they're kept as slaves, but their magic relies on the extraction of energy from the earth. I know these are old fantasy tropes, but clearly there's something going on in culture where that's like what's coming to the surface about kind of imagining fantasy in our present moment, which is mildly interesting.
It definitely makes you want to question who truly is on the good guy's side, like who truly is the lesser of it. Honestly, the game is who's the lesser of two evils,
right?
Instead of who's the good guy, who's the bad guy,
right? And do we need to, I mean, at least for the first half of the game, I think the story is really going for like, do we have to use violence to prevent future violence, which kind of makes me think of the nuclear topic. Like we have to fight for control of the ultimate weapon in order to keep the world safe. It's like, well, it's possible that's not true.
That's interesting. Yeah, the escalation of violence of like, do we need to constantly be raising the stakes of this, where the only stake is like someone has to wipe out the other?
Yeah, and since it's this game, it's not very subtle. It even refers to things as like the weapon, and like we have to gain control of the one weapon. And it's like, okay, yeah, I get what we're going for here. Which reminds me, unless we have more to say about the story itself, the tone of this game. I have kind of a naive question. Is this what people mean when they say like Whedon-esque? Is this like the tone of some of the Marvel movies, at least the early ones, or the middle ones, I should say?
That is absolutely what I was getting. Yeah. Even down, you literally watch them touch down and they're doing superhero poses when they like touch down on the ground. I shit you not. I took a bong rip for every single time.
To me, it felt slightly more contemporary than those things, because those are like a decade ago at this point, right?
True, but like the fact that every line needed to end with a punchline versus letting the mood just hang in the air. Like the first 20 minutes, you hear the line brain rot. Like, are you kidding me? Babs deserved better. But, like, it just felt too much. Like, the story and the world building did not need it.
As in, you think the world building was good enough to not need the humor? Is that kind of the implication?
Not that it didn't need the humor, that it did not need to have a punchline at the end of everything, or it did not need to have this really grandiose tone, but then diminish it with a humorous line or something. Yeah, like a zinger. It felt unnecessary to me.
I have like a two-part answer to this one. Partially because I've heard from some of the developers in podcasts talk about that they wanted to bring the levity and like a little bit of the Guardians of the Galaxy or like Thor Ragnarok or some of like the more absurdist versions of some of the Marvel movies into this, because they're like, not every big action game needs to have these like dire stakes where everyone's like sulking and sad and moving around instead. And they're like, what if we had like this kind of like grandiose adventure kind of vibe going on, right? I all of that said, as someone that like deeply enjoyed the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, I think it shows how hard it is to pull off that balance of being able to be funny and heartwarming and serious and to try and capture all those elements. And I think the places where this like hit its tone the best was actually within lore entries that like acknowledged the crazy part of the lore. And there was one short one that I actually wrote down where he said I think they're all written from the perspective of Jack, right? That he's like recording some of the different pieces, but he said something about the metal memory. Said, turns out the older constructs eventually start to leak their thought patterns, I guess, as they become more intelligent. It takes the shape of this metallic goo foam stuff. Look, just go with it. Like, all right, I think it's kind of like trying to achieve that. But I think to Ren's point, it doesn't hit it well enough within the moment to moment to make it feel like it is fully capturing that tone.
I don't have a lot of experience with media, I guess. So
well, I would say
I'm not
movies.
Nate's a hipster.
Well, certainly movies, but like AAA games, like to me, as a naive outsider, it was very like I think what that developer's talking about without the like exhaustion of dire stakes, especially in a world of like the Call of Duties before they kind of, it seems like recently my sense of it is that they kind of became bombastic. But for a while there, it was like ultra high melodrama and like these extremely evil villains that you like. Just the characters were very far from being actual real people. And something about the writing in this game like did make the characters feel more like people. And it's also kind of interesting how that intersects with, I think all of these characters in the game were face scans of the actors, right?
Oh, that definitely would check out.
Like, I think I don't know. There's just, to me, the writing here, like you said, Greg, I was totally of two minds. Part of me was like, oh boy, we're doing this, huh? But on the other, like it seemed to really fit what we're going for here. And it really was relieving to not be put in something like super, I don't know, dour.
Heavy.
Yeah. And I found it kind of interesting that the light, like how to juxtapose the light humor with such kind of a world stakes, which I just kind of found that interesting. And I guess it kind of led me to wonder, like, is this also a little bit YA literature kind of in this realm? Like,
I definitely feel like that piece at the end there also might hit on it, where they're introducing like this also fantasy world more so than these other games that you might want to compare it to. And I like the YA comparison because it's like there's like big stakes, but no one really wants to handle them, or at least like the way that the characters choose to interact with them isn't through like a deep and like sorrowful acknowledgement of what's happening. Instead, it's like, hey, we need to like keep a levity about this to keep moving through, which I think does like impart something onto the people.
Okay, so tell me if you guys smiled or cringed at the line when you fucking confront Luna and you're like, so what, you did this all for free tuition? And she was like,
God.
Free tuition's pretty great. I was like, that fucking rules.
No. She said, one, don't knock free tuition. Oh God, I'm so mad.
Like your feelings about that in a critical moment of the plot is pretty much like how you're going to feel about this game. I feel like for me, I was like, yeah, I buy it. That's funny.
It just, I don't know. It felt more of just like a jab to the outsider versus the actual player being like, don't knock free tuition. I don't know. It just felt kind of, I didn't like it.
Like you're saying that it kind of like was used to make the reader not question the plot choices that had to happen for the story to keep going, basically.
Honestly, I feel like that's a lot of what Luna's plot points are. Is like she just kind of is like, well, I had to do it. and now I'm gonna leave because I just don't have anywhere else to do or anywhere else to go because I had to do it.
She's a frustrating character because she's a bummer.
She's frustrating because I wanted to like her because she's hot. I mean, because she's a good character.
Craig, isn't she your type? That's the other thing I was thinking about when I was interacting with Luna.
Luna is not my type.
Oh, damn. Okay.
Oh, she had me with the butch haircut and the deep voice. I was like, yes, please. And then she died. I was like, damn it. I'm going to get stuck with
You nailed it for
boy.
one half of the podcast. 1/3.
Just the wrong one.
Yeah.
50-50. Yeah, I found her kind of an interesting contrast with the rest of the tone because everyone's like funny and carefree. Well, I guess not everyone. What's her face? The commander isn't.
No, yeah.
But
Okay.
even that's kind of weird because you're like fucking like Jack's relationship with Kirkin is like hot and cold. Sometimes you're like bullshitting about like I don't know a lot about the military, but I don't think you ever get to talk to a superior officer that way. And if you do, all the media I've seen about the military is fucking lies.
Also, oh my god, I hate him trying to cut corners with her. You're like, do I really have to go through the pathlon?
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
Do I really have to do this? Like, come on.
Is this what the military is now with all the Gen Zs and millennials in it? Is there no more like shut up and give me 20?
Nepotism, even in Immortals of Aveum. Even though technically he was an orphan. I don't know, either way. But it's interesting you bring up her being similar to Kirkin because Luna at the very beginning is very Kirkin-esque, where it's like she's trying to bring up the mood while keeping things serious. And she knows that there's a purpose, but at the same time, she wants to focus on the here and now. And it's interesting because later on in the game, if you bring up the similarity between the two, Luna gets pissed. Like, Luna's like, do not compare me to Kirkin. And so it's kind of interesting. I think that Luna doesn't want to acknowledge how similar she is to Kirkin.
Well, Luna's... yeah, I mean, that makes me think about how Luna's interesting in that she's fighting for the big picture, but kind of chooses her individual, like, well-being over the greater good. I mean,
unless she gets knocked off a bridge, then she joins the other side, I guess.
Well, that's what I'm saying. She's like, well, there's free tuition. I'll just take that path now.
Yeah, she just felt so like, I'm going to go wherever the wind takes me. And okay, actually, I'm renaming this game. It's Immortals of Aveum. Because nobody really knows what they're trying to do morally. They're just like, well, someone's got to do this, I guess.
Well, one character is pretty steadfast, right? Kirkin knows what's right the whole time.
Yeah,
the story and the world changes around her.
She also hides a lot of unnecessary shit from you.
Well, so I thought that was interesting because like that makes sense considering like she's the commander and you're a
make
grunt.
You a tool. Yeah.
But again, that was like kind of that back and forth between like, am I her friend? Like, or are we,
subordinates?
True.
Yeah, like a dramatic subordinate. I feel like we would be several levels below her.
Although once you become an immortal, right, then you've reached into the upper ranks of the military at that point.
Yeah, you've been in for 5 years.
Yeah, you think it's just like you're both immortals? She just happens to have longer tenure. Yeah,
I think higher tenure and like and does have a higher rank, right? Like she's commanding, but she does like kind of flip into being the bad guy by the end, where it's like, hey, we can find a mutually beneficial way out of this, and hers is like, no, the only way now is for us to fully win the war, right? Like she mirrors Sandrak from that perspective, as far as going like there is no end state that doesn't end with one side fully taking over the other.
It's like the structural moral here is that you have to adjust and learn and adapt to new circumstances. The only people that are villains in this story are the ones that didn't.
Yeah, that remain like very fixed in their point of view of like, this is I will see this all the way through to the end, no matter what new information is presented to me.
Which is kind of awesome. I mean, as far as villains go, that's a very resonant quality, I think.
Yeah, it's like the game is telling you stagnation is death.
Yeah. Seems very, very of our time.
Oh, sorry. Stagnation is death. Don't want to get brain rot. Boop-a-doo. That's how the game would tell you.
Is brain rot like a cringe word or something?
It's a cringe term. I hear it all the time from my 15-year-old niece. It's just a term for like if you are consuming a media that makes your brain go numb and
TikTok.
Rot away. Yeah, pretty much. That's why I deleted mine.
We're too old for this, Nate.
We are too old for this. Well, that was okay. So that was something else I wanted to ask, especially Ren. Like, is the fact that I thought the dialogue was funny and engaging a sure sign that people too old for that style of dialogue wrote that dialogue?
Not
Probably.
At all. No, I don't think so. Okay. I will say when I first was playing the game, like when I first started this game, I actually was a lot more apologetic towards it. Like, my wife was watching me play and she'd be like, oh my god, this is so cringy. And I'm like, you haven't been playing it the whole time. You don't know. Like, you're just not as invested as I am. And now as invested as I am, it's cringy, but I can understand why people would be drawn to it. I mean, what game isn't going to have some cringy line or some meme reference to it? I just felt like the game was so oversaturated with it that it's going to age it so quickly. Which kind of diminishes, I guess, the quality for me.
Interesting.
I don't think it's a negative thing to be able to point out the type of writing, because I mean, we can watch a classic movie and be like, oh my god, they're using the brick phones or whatever. Like, we'll always be able to point out those things. It's just, I feel like we're becoming more attuned to it in writing, that it's just not as easily digestible.
That's fascinating.
I think it's hard to make something that stands the test of time. Like, I think that
absolutely
is, I don't even think that that's specific to our time either, right? I think that it's why people go back and choose a handful of movies from the 80s or 70s or so on and so forth that seem like they can still remain resonant, and even with dated references and like a different type of humor, they still like hit the beats. Which I don't know. I don't know where I'm really going with that, but I think that that's interesting when looking at this, where I didn't finish the story and be like, oh, this has some of those qualities where I know coming back to it. Instead, it was like, oh, this tried to capture some of those qualities and didn't succeed, and made for like an interesting kind of fun time, but ended up being junk food, where I like kind of finished it and I was, thinking about it from a standpoint of like, oh, that was fun. I don't really think I got much but empty calories, but like it was a time.
I don't really know where to put this, but I thought this was kind of neat. There was a quote from one point: as it's grown over the years, the wound's increasing gravity has increasingly even pulled concepts from our heads before we think of them, pulled words from pages of now empty books. I love this like fantasy or sci-fi idea of like how certain things can rob us of our ability to imagine the future, or how technologies or systems can, kind of just control and shape how we think about things. And I think the wound is this game's metaphor for environmental degradation. And it, there's a lot of things in our world that could kind of be relevant to. And I think I thought that was a cool quote.
It kind of made me think of, Thaddeus mentioned at one point that horses were extinct, and Jack's like, it's a horse. That's what I kind of think of when I heard it, was it's like, it's literally history is being ripped away because it's just become obsolete. But also interesting how it's almost like accumulating everything in it. So it makes me wonder that if it were to heal, if it would be restored. If that makes sense.
So at the end of the game, there's this group of character, of which Rook is one. What are their names? Not the Guardians.
Aloy.
Yeah.
Aloy. So there's this group of people, the Aloy, who humanity perceives as taking the magic from them, basically. So the humanity thinks the Aloy are evil and have always kind of thought themselves at war for at least a very long time. And it turns out the Aloy are supposed to be absorbing the excess negative energy produced by the use of magic by humans and recycling them back into the earth in a healthy way. So they're kind of the metaphor for like the the environmental cycle of renewal and restoration.
Trees.
Which is really, I don't know, that's pretty cool. I thought that was a really neat thing to have as a plot point.
That was I thought that was like legitimately, and I'm curious, Ren, if you made it to this point where that reveal did happen, where it was like,
nope.
Okay, yeah. I was like, Rook being like the leader of the people and everyone fears them, and it's like, no, they have intelligence and they are literally here to provide balance, and instead humanity looked at them and was like, we fear you and we are going to try and eliminate you. Even, and then it comes at the cost of literally the planet breaking
balance
apart.
Of the planet. Yeah. So
that makes sense.
So how this all goes down in the end, Ren, is Sandrak is going for control of that big machine. That's the thing that is okay. Basically, he's like, the lower you're going to take our power, I need to get control of everything and prevent them from getting any of the power. And you're like, well, I actually went down there and talked to them, and they're just like, it's how the cycle is supposed to work. They're supposed to like return the magic back to the earth so we can keep using it sustainably. And Sandrak's like, yeah, that's fine, but I need to stop them from getting the power. And then you have to kill Sandrak again.
Ew.
Is that I don't remember what the giant walking Greek Colossus of Rhodes statue has to do with it, but something, and it's pretty fucking cool.
You mean when the game became a mech anime?
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean.
Yeah, we started playing the Neon Genesis Evangelion music in the background.
Nice.
No, I'm kidding. No,
I don't. It was like the magic flowed through that or something. Like something like that.
This is gonna be such a '90s reference. It made me think of Reptar in Rugrats when they go to Japan and they can operate the giant Reptar. Literally the point where Devin picks up Zendara and Jack in the hand and opened it. I was like, Reptar!
That's amazing.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's funny. Good generational crossover.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think you're way younger than me, and then you drop a Rugrats reference.
Yeah, it's okay. I'll be 28 this year. I'm almost
the same.
I'm getting there.
So, is there anything else you thought was cool about the story, Craig or Ren?
I did enjoy, and I'm sorry that Ren won't see this piece, but at the very end when Rook shows up, and they're like talking about what the final plan is, and he just like drops in and just says, he's like, what a crock of shit, and then just moves on. I was like, all right, this is one of those moments where that the zinger worked like very well, especially from like how stoic and stoic of a character he is. It was just like a great, like, yep, this plan is a bunch of bullshit, but let's see what happens.
As hard as I have been on this game, I will say Thaddeus and Rook are my favorite characters. Their quips and things, it feels a lot more natural because in a way Thaddeus kind of reminds me of like Clint Eastwood, kind of like he just like comes in and kind of knows what he's doing, but also he reminds me of like a more moral Handsome Jack. Like if Handsome Jack didn't go off the deep end too.
Yeah, yep, that makes sense.
Like if he went into exile and just drank his sorrows away, like that's kind of what I got Thaddeus of. But Rook just was like, he's created by the Pentasod and given this task to do, and he's kind of like everybody else. It's like, well, I got to do it. But I do really appreciate how he's like, no, that's stupid. Here's how we're gonna do this for reals. Like, he's a badass. I love him.
You guys are all wrong.
Yeah, Rook is really cool.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned Thaddeus too, since we didn't really talk about him, but I thought similar that his character showed up and like brought the best part of the tone forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to say it. You guys want to talk about some gameplay?
Oh God.
What did you think of how this game played? I guess I should say you have 3 magic colors. Blue, which is like an Insta-Gib rifle from Unreal Tournament. Green, which is rapid fire blobs. Red, which is a shotgun. You can acquire a bunch of mods that change things a little bit. Like the shotgun can become more of a, one of the weapons can become like kind of surprisingly different, and I didn't like it, so I changed it back. But
are you talking about the blue javelin?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah,
I
I
like-
didn't care for that one either.
Yeah,
But there is actually quite a bit of variety between the colors weapons. Like
definitely.
the
Yeah.
the green one, there's the seeker shards, there's the oh my god.
Yeah, there's like
Frag
2
shards or
modes for every color, right?
Yeah.
I think there's 3 varieties for every weapon.
And
Really?
I guess for me, I looked at more of the colors by their range. So green,
Mhm.
short range, blue, long range, red, mid to short range, versus like how to use them.
I would
But-
flip that. I was
Okay.
thinking red short range, green medium, and blue long.
Yeah, maybe that.
That makes sense.
No, that makes
Although the red was more effective longer away than I assumed from Halo.
Yeah.
It definitely was good for crowd control for sure.
Yeah.
Did any of you ever get fluent with the fact that there was just one button to swap the 3? Like, did you ever
Yes.
have it memorized which came after which so you could always get
Oh
to the one?
God, no.
Yeah,
no.
okay. Because I
No,
was
I didn't-
pretty much
yeah.
till the very end was like, I'm on green. Oh, fuck, a red enemy. I'm just going to scroll until I get to red. I hope it's next. Oh, fuck, it's not
Yeah.
next.
Yeah. So, kind of harping back to BioShock reference, it kind of made me think of how it has the jockey system where you can choose between the different mana you use based on the jockeys you pick up in the game. So like you have the bucking bronco, you have the fire immolation thing, yada yada. But in BioShock, you can just press the bumper to bring up and choose choose the one you need. And I really think this game could have really needed that, because I would cycle through and then I'd realize, oh fuck, I landed on the wrong one. Cycle through again, accidentally click the wrong button, have to cycle through again. It just got so repetitive and frustrating. I should say I played on the easiest difficulty, and I had to redo just about every battle I went into, which is embarrassing, but also I had help, and still we were both like, how is this easy difficulty? It felt very unfair.
It it betrays its origins as a console game. It's very frustrating that, like in any PC game, weapons are the numbers, and you can pick 10 different weapons. Like, and the fact that there's only a key to change weapons one direction, like even if the mouse wheel up was the other direction, then I would be totally perfect because
one
I
up,
have
one
access
down,
to
and you
everything.
can get all 3.
Literally, even in Tetris, you can choose which direction you're spinning the piece. Like,
Yep. That's a very apt. Yes. So that was just like a frustration of, I mean, I feel like even on a console, there's enough buttons to do that.
Yeah.
Like
it's
so.
Yeah. I'm
Swipe
surprised
up
that
on the
that's
touchpad,
not
swipe down, like
how that worked on the PC, that there wasn't an option for you to have at least go up or down.
Right.
But I think there's a couple pieces, because I did write down like just in general thoughts when I was playing of just combat feel / like a balance towards death. It kind of felt like, and apparently ran into that. The other element that I'll mention besides the weapons and having like the 3 weapons to balance there, I was surprised there was no weapon wheel, and maybe I was trying to determine, like, from a design perspective, was this a piece where they were trying to reduce the amount of friction so you're not stopping combat to make a choice, and instead it's like, it's a trying to keep you in a flow. But there's so many other pieces that are also occurring, because you have the, like, on the left side of your hand, you have like 4 other support methods.
Yes.
And then R1 on a console controller would be a special elemental attack, and then L1 plus R1 is a different super attack. And I was like, in the heat of battle, I never became like fluent with keeping all of those different components like in memory space, like to where to focus on. And the game does try to force you out of that because of, I hate that I'm gonna say this, the Ikaruga-ness of this of the combat arenas to force you to swap colors, so you can't just like sit and spam the shotgun or something of that nature. Like you need to try and use the whip or try and use the shield or try and swap between the weapons. And there's just so much going on that's one of those elements. When we talk about AAA is in what I would call like AAA games, a lot of times like everything gets polished so far off and has like so many different revisions towards like ease of use and making that feel good and right. And if you compare this to something like Doom, which I think there's like some comparisons to be made as far as the combat arenas, the fluidity of combat, there's a little bit of verticality, and the speed in which you need to be making decisions. Like that feels great, and you have a ton of different options at your disposal. And this game, again, I think it's similar to Ren, where it's like that those combat arenas never fully clicked into like a flow state.
The other aspect I'd say is I don't know if maybe you guys experience this, but did you ever feel that you would try to use like a health crystal and instead you'd be using a limpet, or you'd be using your refractory crystal, or it literally would just not register in time before you got another hidden and died and had to start completely over from the beginning?
I'm glad you said that, Craig, about the polish, because there was a weird amount of this game doesn't have a lot going on. There's only 3 weapons. Clearly some amount of polish was done.
Yeah.
But especially with the limpets and the health items and stuff, and the whatever the Dragon Ball Z mega Japanese attack was. Yeah, is that what that was? Like I didn't quite know what button that was until the Sandrak fight forced me to learn.
Oh really? I used the shit out of that thing.
It just was like, it was great, but it's like Z and X on the keyboard, and I'm not the best at Z and X in particular, so it's like sometimes I can press them both, and it's like I don't know which one it was, but useful.
Oh, yeah. You'll love this. On the Xbox controller, it's pushing in both thumbsticks.
That makes sense as like the super. Like that's kind of
I should post a picture of my thumbs. I have calluses. They hurt so bad.
Going hard on it.
So, and I feel like I should kind of clarify a bit. The difficulty scaling is my problem. It feels like at the beginning of the game when you're going through training and everything, I felt that I was going to be overloaded with all my mana crystals and health crystals. I was going to have way too much of everything, and that I just need to get used to using them. But as the game went on, it just felt like there was a spike somewhere that I just missed. And yeah, it didn't feel as fun after a while, I guess, is what I'm trying to get more at, versus shitting on the whole game. It just felt like after a while it was more of a chore versus fun to complete.
I have kind of a lot of thoughts on the power curve of this game. On the one hand, it was it's typical that the enemy growth curve kind of exactly matches your weapon growth curve, right? So you're kind of exhibiting the same difficulty all the way through. I liked that this game, like by the end, was still giving you kind of the standard characters, so your improved weapons could kind of mow down people at some points. Mm-hmm. But I was really confused by the inconsistency of the game's commitment to the soft Ikaruga-ness, which is to say, do I actually have to use red to defeat a red enemy? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It's when there's a shield, I definitely intuited that the shield was more requiring of that, but it still seemed like I was doing some damage, and I enjoyed the blue so much that it was just like I could just like spam blue attacks enough to be like actually worth it, because I never invested in my red. And like it leaving that lack of clarity was really frustrating, especially when the Sandrak fights rolled around and you're kind of like, oh, is this how the rest of the game is supposed to be? Like what? So like,
you kind of danced around the skill tree too.
Yeah.
And Nate, you said you kind of jumped your where did you dump all of yours into? Like what
blue
colors?
And a little bit into green, and I didn't put any into red.
At all?
Craig?
None. Yeah.
Okay. I probably went almost like 33%, 33%, 33%. I probably went like a little bit up of each skill tree, and then indexed a little bit further into stuff later in the game when I was like, okay, I like using this power more, like I'll try and prioritize. I think I kind of went straight up the middle of the trees, which just unlocks like higher damage for that specific color, just to like increase the damage a little bit for each of them.
Maybe that's where I went wrong, because I also kind of went pretty evenly distributed between each of the colors, but I focused more on regeneration and like upgrading the secondary items like the limpets, the lash, the refractory stone.
Yeah.
So maybe I was shooting myself in the foot with that.
Yeah, might have gone too wide as opposed to a little bit of more narrow. I was kind of expecting that the amount of level ups that you would get would almost allow you to unlock everything across the skill trees by the end of the game, which is definitely not true. But as
which is really surprising.
Yeah, it was like surprising in some aspects until you look at the map and recognize that there like is some Metroidvania like stuff happening across the game with different areas or puzzles,
extra bosses or whatever.
Yeah, I think there's extra bosses. There's like puzzles that you can't do until much later in the game that you can go back to because of powers that you unlock. Which I was like, God. I'm not doing any of these, but yeah, I was kind of surprised in that.
The puzzles were fun. The boss fights were not.
I got myself stuck in an optional den and didn't realize it wasn't needed for the story progression at one point.
Yeah. And I just was like, see ya.
Well, and it's because I found a secret area, I got excited, and then I realized that my marker was nowhere near the objective, and I was like, oh, damn it.
I do think one of the other things that happen as the game progresses is this is something where you see, like, where did the budget go, and enemy variety is one thing, which there's not a great amount, but I do think as the challenge is ramped up, and similar to maybe what Ren was feeling, is like they just became spongier in some areas also. Like they just seem to just take more, or do the classic kind of thing of, hey, you're locked in an arena and we're just going to throw a couple higher level enemies at you with the smaller ones, with the kind of lower level ones around you. And it's like, that was where, for me, from a gameplay perspective, it started to hit the end of its rope as the game kept going on longer and longer, where I was like, man, I can only do so many of these arenas back to back to back to back of like, okay, rinse and kind of repeat, which is what it started to feel like as the game continued on.
Yeah, I absolutely agree there.
So the boss fights were terrible for even Almighty Craig as well, huh?
Yeah, the boss fights sucked. They just...
Yeah, why do you feel that way?
I don't think that they were testing your ability to like utilize your powers like in an effective or interesting way. It, to me, felt like it was here is a massive pool of health and just kind of run around and spam whatever attacks you have. But like, I thought the lower level characters were doing more interesting things with the shields and things of that nature. And that might also just play into the boss fights were, specifically at Sandrak, were so long to try and push through that it's like anything that they kind of did pop up, like the novelty wore off almost instantaneously. I don't know. There was just something about them that they just felt like a slog. It didn't feel like I was like accomplishing much, but just like kind of spamming my attacks over and over and over again.
Praying that the shield will stay down for a few more seconds to get a few more hits in.
Why did you hate them, Nate?
I just don't like a boss fight.
Boss fights are really hard to do.
Yeah. I think. Like, my favorite kind of boss fight has checkpoints, but then I feel bad about a boss fight because a checkpointed boss fight feels really narrative or immersion breaking to me. And this game, on the flip side, should have had checkpoints and didn't, or had very non-generous boss fight checkpoints, I felt, which is kind of weird.
In particular for the Sandrak fight, the fact that he starts off every single time with, oh, Kirkin found a Triarch, huh? I just got so tired of being like, yeah, I know, I'm a Triarch, yeah, die, please.
There's another Sandrak fight at the end of the game, by the way.
Yeah, no, I'm glad I didn't get there. I might have broken my controller.
Well, the other one, so there's something to be said there, because the second Sandbag fight feels like what the first one probably should have been. Like there's a little bit more mechanically going on. Luna is there and uses her shield, so you can kind of get behind it. There's just like a little bit more going on that almost makes it fun, but it still ends up being, I don't know. It's really, boy, talking about boss fights can make you crazy, because it's like, yeah, you're on the razor's edge of dying the whole time. And it's like, I would definitely say that about a good boss fight too. So that's like, I don't know what it is, but it didn't quite feel right.
At one point, I was like, is this what Dark Souls feels like? Is this what it feels like to play a Dark Souls game?
Okay, so in Dark Souls, you have kind of a lot of tools, and you could use multiple things at multiple points. Maybe there's one or two that are best, but you have like a variety of ways of approaching. And in this game, there was only one thing you could do at any point, and you just had to execute it like perfectly. And it wasn't about finding or being creative in that. It was just about executing. And maybe that's part of why it seems bad. What do you think? Does that resonate, Craig?
Yeah, I think so. I'm still, my brain got stuck on, is this what Dark Souls feels like?
Well, what do you think?
Is this what Dark Souls feels like?
Yeah.
No. And I think that's because, like within the Dark Souls or Elden Ring and those games, I think that you're constantly seeing like pattern management is one of the things, right? That you're kind of like capturing those elements, and recognizing that it's some of your like timing windows that need to be increased. Like it feels like a skill barrier, where this one feels like I don't know, a bit of a matter of like attrition and
luck.
A little bit of luck of, yeah, I'm like, I mean, there is like, are you timing your shield correctly and some of your other elements? But I think that it's just one. Yeah, it's a very shallow pool, right? Where I think a lot of times with the souls, you get a lot of different variations on how you might be able to complete something, and here it's like you're very limited. And I actually feel that might be the key piece here, where I feel like within the boss fights, like more of your combat options are reduced as opposed to elevated. And so from that standpoint, I feel like your like option pool actually shrinks in some elements.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Do you have anything more to say about the gameplay?
I have a gear gripe.
Fire away.
Why can your character only wear 2 fucking rings? And not only that, I would argue that he can wear 10 because he wears one of them on his fucking thumb.
Are you serious?
I shit you not. It drove me insane. I was like, I have like
hilarious.
at least 3. I have at least 3 good rings. Why can I only wear 2 of them? Like it just drove me insane. From a like you're not holding anything. You have a fucking bracer on your arm. That's it.
Hey Jack, I got a free tip on getting 80% more power.
Yeah.
It just drove me insane from a logic standpoint.
Yeah,
and
that's
also
funny.
Tri-arc. You should have at least 3 of something. Like, yeah, that's my minor rant there.
I will
be
add,
able to wear more than 2 rings.
That's a very good point.
I'll add one additional component there, which is the armor. Like, we didn't even really speak about it, which I think says how impactful it is to the experience. But yeah, that is one component where I think it's just one of those things where it's another system that was added in, and I don't think was fleshed out fully, and so it ends up being something that's not really impactful, and is a little bit of like, I don't know, subtraction by addition. They've added something additional, and it's like, oh, there's this other element that I might have that can impact the gameplay experience, and it turns out to be mostly inconsequential throughout the entire experience.
I don't even remember the armor. Is that just one of the items you can equip?
Yeah,
a bunch of items you can equip. It's like the different shards for your hands, like those do power-ups, but then there's also the rings, which do modifiers, right. And there's like a different gauntlet. But yeah, it's like,
there's armor,
it's a very, yeah.
You can upgrade your mana and health storage as well, which those are just so expensive. I felt like I could only do that at endgame, which sucked.
I do not enjoy managing upgrades like specking, character build. Like, it's just not fun to me. I really
Okay,
like the like equip best items. Like, let's go.
Yeah.
Like, I
another game compare. Oh, sorry.
well, just one other. The other side of that is like it's cool that I can have sort of a different loadout, right? So it's not in this game. You wouldn't really want there to be like equip maybe best DPS or something.
Right.
You might get the javelin and be like, I don't want the javelin build. Like, and I
Yeah.
appreciate that there's a little more nuance there, but I just like, yeah, I don't really appreciate looking through menus of power ups and having to think with fear of the future of like, well, what if I don't have enough points for the whole thing? Maybe I need to study the whole chart and like stack rank what I want. And yeah,
What if this
Or
weapon actually feels terrible as it levels up and it doesn't get more fun in the other one?
yeah, that kind of
or
stuff
you
is just
funnel
not fun.
or you funnel everything into upgrading it, and then in the next level you find like a legendary that
Exactly.
completely obsoletes it. And yeah, it was very frustrating, kind of trying to balance it. It reminded me of Borderlands, where you have way too many guns to choose from, but it's like epic shiny, rare shiny, so it's like you kind of feel more inclined to use them.
Right.
But it felt way too oversaturated.
Yeah. I think that probably is something that would have gotten polished a little bit. Like it wasn't bad as it is. It just wasn't my thing to be thinking about all the time. It just didn't excite me very much.
Added to the experience.
Yeah, and it needed a little bit more time to cook.
Graphics and straddling these two topics. This game was made in Unreal, and at least on PC, it felt like an Unreal game. So I don't really have any complaints about the gameplay. Unreal seems good at shooting things where you point. I really liked wandering into an arena. Like, I'm very good with the mouse, so I could always nail down headshots all the time. Felt like any other game. But I was curious, like, is how the game translates to controllers something that can be like fucked up in an Unreal game? Like, did this game feel good to you guys? Like, were you able to successfully point and aim at enemies, or does that differ?
I had to make some changes. I had to make a few minor changes to the sensitivity, but not much. Graphically, beautiful. And I played this on the Xbox Series X. Yeah, big TV. It looked beautiful. Even like the refresh rates and everything, it really wasn't like stuttering too bad. Obviously, when you get into some of the bigger arenas where you have tons of colors going everywhere, it can stutter a little bit, but not to the point that it really disrupted the gameplay. If anything, this game was absolutely gorgeous. It was one of the first things I saw. I really liked the colors in it. It didn't feel like oversaturated or brown. If anything, I felt maybe flashbanged a bit. But I mean, I'm also just a hermit who likes to sit in the dark. So I mean, but yeah, just from a graphics standpoint, even on console, it looked really good. I'd say if anything, the controls were maybe a little floaty. But not too terrible. I could aim okay. It was more of like when I used the lash to jump up to places and having to hover in certain places, it was kind of difficult to manage.
I don't feel like we've even finished talking about the limpets and how they're controlled with a separate 3-wheel thing. We brought it up, but that is crazy.
Yeah.
Like, I never had the right one selected when I needed it. Like, I only really used the platforming one, the lash.
Oh, yeah.
Like, so yeah.
I use the stone a lot for stunning enemies. That was very useful in battle.
It's probably helpful on console that it's split between each half of the controller. So all of that stuff's on the left D-pad, and then the other stuff's mostly on the face buttons. So
yeah.
Was Y or was the top button change weapon?
Yeah, that was the weapon change. Yeah. Triangle.
Yeah, I'm literally looking at my controller. It was Y to change the weapon, and in order to use any of like the special color powers, like the blue one that creates the rocks from underground, or the green projectile one, whatever, those were mapped with the right bumper and either Y, X, or A.
Oh yeah,
And
I forgot about the
the
combination.
also
Oh,
the mega punch, which I also used a lot, which also probably explains the calluses. That one was right bumper and pushing in the right thumbstick. So you had to push both of those in.
little carpal
And
tunneling. Yeah.
yeah, pretty much. It wasn't, it just was a lot to remember, honestly. Like that, and it just being kind of floaty and unwieldy, that just kind of made it a bit more difficult for me, I guess.
Um, do you have any thoughts about the game feel, Craig?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it. Like, Unreal is a good engine for shooters, and it still feels like a good engine for shooters. So from that standpoint, I think, yeah, it felt fine on console as far as the actual shooting aspect of it, ignoring the other gameplay mechanics of it. And this is one of those places where it is probably helpful that some engine consolidation has happened for some of the smaller studios, right? Like I have my own personal view on engine consolidation, but and how it like homogenizes game feel, but for this it gives an opportunity for a developer that's putting out their first game to hit like a high quality bar like right out the gate, which I don't think you would probably be able to do if you're trying to also, you know, put together your own engine and things of that nature. So to what Ren said, it looks great, it runs great, feels good.
Did you run into weird aliasing and ghosting if you were like running when the subtitles were on screen?
Not that I recall, but I do know that that is a thing that happens in Unreal. Like I can't remember what, I think it was the most recent Until Dawn remake where that happens in cutscenes, but not during gameplay, which is weird.
It has to do with graphics upscaling, I think. It's or
Okay.
dynamic frame interpolation. It's trying to
Yeah,
like guess, and it's easier for it to do that with like geometry than it is for text.
that makes sense.
But that was pretty distracting. But I mean, worth it because the game ran at like a rock solid 100 frames, which was very nice.
And I'd say even the audio balancing didn't really make subtitle. I'm a person who puts on subtitles no matter what. Um, but it felt like at least you could hear the characters very well over the music and
Yeah,
battle things like
yeah,
that.
it was mixed really well, wasn't it?
Hmm.
Um,
It's like just those little things that you notice. I'm someone who's more used to playing things on the Nintendo Switch, so pretty graphics and refresh rate are not things that are very common ground there.
Yeah, not right now.
yeah, that makes
And
sense.
and even there, I feel like sometimes when you play on a console, like you have refresh rate issues, things like that. But I honestly was really impressed playing this game. Like when I first played it, I was like, oh, this is a AAA game.
Nice. Do you guys have any thoughts about the soundtrack? I thought it was meh.
I don't remember it, so I'm going to go with meh.
My wife Josie and I are very much into drum and beat. What is that?
Drum and bass.
It's something like that. So some of the soundtrack was very fun to just like bop to, but nothing that I would go and seek out.
Wait,
It was no Paradise Killer soundtrack.
wait, like what? My only memory of this soundtrack was that it was like vaguely kind of like, I don't want to say generic, it's such an offensive word, but like standard fantasy orchestral swells and kind of almost
If I
film
had
music, but kind of not quite that.
yeah, in a way, it kind of reminded me of rejected music for Stranger Things. Like it just wasn't dark enough for Stranger Things, if that makes
Amazing.
sense.
Amazing. Amazing.
But it didn't like the music in Saren in particular, and that's where you first start out. That like I was bopping to it, and, like I liked it, but nothing to write home about.
Now I feel like I have to pull the soundtrack, which is 2 hours and 33 minutes, unless you go for the extended edition, which is 6 hours and 19 minutes.
Oh boy.
Is it just looping the soundtrack?
I Oh yeah. Well, actually, this is dope as hell. This is something I love in games where they actually give you the full suite of each area. So the extended
Oh, okay.
soundtrack is like 21 minutes per each track, and there's only 18 tracks, as opposed to the main soundtrack has 41 tracks, all of which are like 3 minutes or less. So can't criticize that. I should have put that on as work music today. I want to know what
I
you mean
was
by drum and B something, because I don't feel like there was
I
drum and
think it's
bass.
drum and bass.
I don't feel
No,
like
because
there was drum and
there's
bass in here.
I feel like if you listen to parts of Siren, it has drum and bass to it.
Well, I will eat my own hat on a future episode. I'm sure that I will find out that you're right, and I will poop my pants ever so slightly.
It's okay. If I'm wrong, I'll pull out whatever hair I have left.
That's right. We've made it this far. You know what it's time for? It's Nate's Architecture Corner.
Bring it.
I read all these books, and I don't have anything to do with it. So I'm going to at least make all of you listen
You're
to...
going to make us be subjected
yeah,
to
exactly.
it.
The relevant things I've learned. So Crownsgate is that area with all the like windmills, as Greg points out, but the hay stacked roofs. And it was just kind of interesting seeing that in a game and being like, oh, that's northern Romania and southwest Ukraine, like the Maramuresh area, that kind of the very specific kind of Transylvanian sort of regional architecture. Not exactly. They took a couple details differently, like they added some colors, but like it seems pretty likely that that was the inspiration point there, which I thought was really cool. And Saren being like I kind of, especially when you get back there at the end of the game, I was kind of like looking around and realizing that it's like a megastructural bridge. Like, and I think one of the diary logs even talks about it at one point, that they just kind of grew on the bottom of a bridge as a settlement. And
Yeah.
that might seem kind of random, but that's actually not random at all. And that's like a very important late Middle Ages and early Renaissance type of settlement, especially in Italy. And you can kind of look up the Ponte Vecchio Bridge, which is like, I think, the only remaining megastructural bridge in existence. But bridges used to be kind of a center of city life and urban development in a way that the rest of cities kind of couldn't be. They were kind of like informal settlements where people just kind of built on top of each other, and all kinds of civic functions would happen over and under. And so that's kind of just interesting, something that you might not know, that's like very much a real world analog. Probably something that one of the level designers knew about when they were making it.
Does the Ponte Vecchio have the giant chain links you can ride like an elevator? Because I want.
We can only assume that yes, there are giant chain links.
Yeah, up the 3 stories.
Plot critical chain links.
If that was, if just the chain link riding was the whole game, I would have been so happy.
It was pretty cool. Moment. Everyone looked cool on those chains, just like hanging there.
Well, and it was very fun how it's like you're literally looking across and having it used as a exposition dump versus like walking and talking. It felt very fluid.
How far have you gotten into Indica? Did you get to the part where there's like
I am stacking cans.
Oh, you did get to the part where there's the giant water wheel that's like going around. Expositional water wheel. Yeah. Kind of sort of similar.
The dog scared the shit out of me.
Yeah, it is scary.
I do enjoy this corner of the podcast because something that we don't often bring directly into the podcast is like all of this art is created by people, right? And they all have their own influences that they're bringing into it. And it's easy to kind of look at something and like kind of reduce it down into like, oh, it's going for this aesthetic, but it's cool to be able to pull out, and it's cool that you were able to notice within this that like, oh, they were probably like linking to these specific areas. I know we hit on it a little bit in last season on like Caravan Sandwich and like what part of France that was pulling from, which I think you see often, but for games to stand out now and especially like try and make their mark, right? Like the setting is one of the key components for that, and how people choose to incorporate architecture, incorporate kind of a real world like grounding point or like an anchor point that people can imagine of being something that they are connected to, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I think so too. I think we're living in a time where there isn't really any aesthetic of the future. So I think we're seeing more and more pulling from the past and the present, like of the human world, especially in projects with this level of fidelity.
Yeah.
Like if you need to imagine a cool looking building, it might genuinely be easier to go out and look at buildings 200 years ago than actually imagine what a tomorrow would look like.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Exactly.
Like, there already is so much beauty that we can take away from modern architecture or historical architecture too.
Yeah. And I don't,
Yeah,
we didn't find any other place to put it, but this game's aesthetic is great. It's got a strong, it looks good.
I was gonna say that like the name of the characters, the name of the locations, even, just the lore in general, it was very fun. Like I really thought it had, like I said, it had so much potential. And I feel like if anything, I could see this being rebooted as like an TV show or something, like a an animated series.
Yeah.
That's honestly the kind of vibes I got from it. Especially like I immediately recognized Kirkin's actress.
Yeah.
Like it was just so immediately there. Not that took me out of her acting. She did a great job. Everyone really did a great job. It just they lost the plot at one point, I guess, or it just the difficulty scaling made the plot.
I think it's all Sandrak, basically.
Yeah. I even wrote down Sandrak, cool antagonist name, very simple yet effective.
He is a good antagonist. I just don't think the fight is like quite what. Well, he's actually kind of a boring antagonist, but I like, yeah.
I do think for your point there, Nate, with like the aesthetic vibes, when we kicked off the episode, we were talking about like making a new IP. Like, what does that look like? And creating something that has its own sense of place and style that doesn't feel directly iterative of other things within the genre. Like choosing fantasy, I think, was a good idea for how to kind of set a world and being able to play with that from like floating lands and magic and these other areas that enable you to choose to go in a direction, but also not limiting it to being like, well, we're just going to look at like, how do we take medieval fantasy and imagine some futuristic kind of approach to it and just like try and graft that onto it? So I think that multicultural like input, even called out in the architecture that you mentioned, is something that helps establish it as its own thing, which I do think is pretty cool on the whole. Although I think in some of the areas it does become a bit repetitive, but I think as a package it presents itself as its own thing.
My only beef there is like the Control-esque like floating platform segments. Like, I don't like understand. Like, if you're gonna throw in additional fights or stuff, like you have enough area in this game to kind of do it in the world. Like,
yeah,
I just didn't think. I got a
you
bad
want to make a platforming challenge.
The archives took a few years off my life.
Like, I didn't even mind the platforming, but I just like, why is this? Like, why are we doing this? Why is this here? Why is it in this setting? Why is it this aesthetic? I don't understand what it's giving to the game. It's not like the game needed extra length.
Yeah. It honestly felt like the game being like, well, we have to give them an objective.
Yeah.
We have to give them something to do instead of just letting you progress.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will add one last little bit about the architecture, which I think this is interesting from a game design perspective, is where I was looking at it, which was the Palathon, which is like the main fortress that is kind of your home base. And
way cooler than Mass Effect's thing.
Well, I'm curious if you guys ran into this, but I found it inscrutable to understand how to navigate through the space without relying on nav bubbles to get around. Like,
Okay,
I hated it.
Okay, I thought we were wrapping up, but we're not wrapping up. This game gives you nav bubbles like you are an attention deficit addled 7-year-old Gen Z kid. It is crazy. It
You're a
doesn't
little
let you go
Pac-Man.
20 feet without being like you go here. It's like, yeah, it's like 5 feet in front of me. Oh, the next one, 10 feet in front of me. What?
Yeah.
Did that stand out to you guys? Was that weird?
Not gonna lie, I depended on it at some point.
Well, I did too, and it's kind of like
but
ask a
there
little
are some
more
points
of
where
me.
you have to like wait for something to happen before you can proceed, and so it just shows you where you have to stay. That was a bit much.
Yeah.
Like, or it would have the objective bubble there, but you have to defeat the enemies first before you can actually press the X button to proceed.
Yeah, the story logic. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm running into this a little bit in Cyberpunk too. It's like, and someone pointed out recently that like, games didn't like in the 80s, games didn't have maps because, and someone was like, well, we didn't have GPS. So we weren't even used to like having like, you had to have the skill to navigate places in a different way than you do now. So I almost wonder if game design is like matching the society. Like,
yeah,
I could barely drive to work without kind of GPS being present.
Right. I think
like
even
that.
people, to your point of like, I know how to get to work and like I will still turn the nav on because for me it's like traffic, is there an accident, like those sort of other informational systems. But I think there's, to your point, tons of people, and especially generations growing up, that it's just literally a follow the line to wherever they need to go. And I would guess is probably a bit of just turn off the brain and like,
Right.
cool, I will follow where the line goes, which is an interesting mirroring within games.
But I think you're right that the Palathon, is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Was
Palathon.
vaguely inscrutable. Although I think if I had to do it a couple more times without those markers every 5 feet, I would have been fine.
So, there was a portion in the Palathon where you have to go in, or there's an optional mission to go and speak to Kenzie in your quarters.
Yeah.
That's where I got
Like,
lost.
where's my
because
quarters?
they don't give you the objective markers for optional quests. So I had to actually figure out how to navigate back to my quarters. And that was a quest, but I did it. It definitely felt like everything, like even the halls, everything just looked so geometrically the same that it was really difficult to differentiate where I was from a landmark standpoint.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I was like thinking in that specific area, I was thinking like actual architecture thoughts of trying to think of like if I was the person that was designing a space and designing it for people to move through it, like would I do something to differentiate, different like ingress or egress points or like something for that nature?
Was it big enough for that like concern? Was there like a lot of it? I don't feel like
there's a lot more of it than you think there is. Like if you just go wandering off in a direction, you're not just going like straight between like maybe where you get dropped in the like main war room. It's like there's like hallways and rooms, and there's other mini puzzles that you can do with some of the stuff you unlock that are off in other areas. It's like there was quite a bit there, and that's why coming back to that space, it was the one time where like it kept reinforcing that. And I think it was it was literally the mission that Ren just mentioned where it didn't give you that piece where I was like forced to confront them and be like, oh man, this thing is like just kind of a bunch of gold and I'm like, are these doors? Will this open when I walk up to it? Yeah. So I thought it was just as thinking about the kind of the built world of the game, and specifically just thinking about like designers' intent when like what they're trying to get the player to do. That was a place where like game design and player intent to me like came clashing head to head.
Yeah, that's interesting. I should have paid more attention in there. I wonder what they were thinking architecturally.
It definitely gives like Pantheon vibes.
Yeah, a little like gold Pantheon with arches.
Well, okay, if we're gonna get into it, gilded. where it's like everything looks very ornate on the outside, but on the inside it's kind of falling apart at the seams. Kind of like Aveum.
Whoa. Whoa.
Sorry, I didn't mean to get existential there.
What a beautiful conclusion. So how about some concluding thoughts? I think I'll go first, if that's cool.
Yeah.
Not cool.
I override your concern and would like to say that this game was good. Like, I found the tone nice. The combat was nice, except for the sand drag fights, which were really frustrating. But even that, not too bad, all things considered. I liked the world and I liked being in it. And I found myself more interested in fantasy tropes than I ever have been before. I mean, I've read kind of a fair amount of fantasy books and kind of concluded I don't like fantasy. And this reminded me that like maybe the like really strong visuals here, like fantasy has an aesthetic, and being in that aesthetic and getting to play around in that space might really kind of change my feelings overall in the whole genre. I thought the casting was pretty interesting, and the kind of slow encroachment of Hollywood talent into gaming as the fidelity of like actors in games continues to march onwards was pretty cool. I really appreciated how the characters in this game just felt like their actors' personalities. Like, I'm sure that's not what they were, but it kind of felt like that, and that was cool. I don't know. This was a game that I kind of played a little bit of it at a time and did not mind booting up and was excited to finish. So, this might not be AAA, but it was a really exciting opening to this year of gaming for me. And I was excited to kind of invest in it. And yeah, I guess that's all I have to say. 8 out of 10, 7.8 out of 10. Sure. It gets the Mata Muresh bump. 8 out of 10. Who's next?
I'll go. Overall, I don't think that this specific game is for me. That being said, it has a lot of good parts. It has some very frustrating parts. But like Nate said, the story, the characters, really the writing in general, I did enjoy for the most part. There's going to be cringe in just about anything, but I feel like overall the game has a really good sense of where it was trying to go. It just needed a little bit more polish in places, and I can't knock the graphics. It truly was beautiful. As for my personal rating, I'd probably lean more towards like a 7 out of 10. But that's just as a person who loves Tetris more than AAA games.
Wow.
And that's my take, and I'm sticking to
That's
it.
Good.
Is Tetris Effect a AAA game?
I play Tetris 99, which is on the Switch, so it is absolutely not AAA.
Tetris 99 does not qualify, but
Tetris Effect, I don't know. You tell me. It feels AA to me.
Yeah.
Well, at least my wins are in the triple digits. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm similar in mindset to Nate on this game, and it was one that I actually started playing late 2024, and I threw out the idea, I think, to Nate, was like, actually, like, this is kind of interesting. It's kind of doing its own thing in a world of games and shooters that have kind of grown to become their own, and it's like, it's an interesting bent to take magic and kind of like sorceries or spell casting and flip that into being like, what if we just replace guns with magic, and what does that feel like? And turns out changes more than you would think. And from a fantasy perspective, like that setting, that world interspersed with that sort of gameplay did combine to feel like something new. And I do think that is hard to achieve with a new IP. It's hard to take risks with a new IP, and I'm sure we might talk a little bit about that. But it's one of those pieces where I finish it and I'm more like saddened by the studio barely being around, and wishing for that era where something that this was, where this was published and came out and had modest success, and ended up finding a small audience, enabled them to take a second crack at it, because there's so many elements that feel, oh, this is a team coming together that's putting these new things in place and is seeing kind of what works and is throwing a lot against the wall. And I think they even recognize, with some of the reflection of like, hey, there's elements in this game. The head of the company said he was like, he's proud of the game. He loves the game. He thinks that there's a bunch of it that's very good, but he was like, there's some elements that are great. And I think that that's something that, that the studio probably, and this is hypothesizing, like, I think they probably internally know that as well, right? It's like, hey, there's elements of this that work really well, and some elements that are like good enough. And that's where I wish that there would be a second outing so it could have one of those next level tune-ups where it's like, oh, that first one was good, but the next one was like truly great. And so that's like where I leave this, and I am sad that because of how it sold and what they need to sustain the studio afterwards to take another shot at it, if they were going to go in a sequel direction, that they're not able to. But I do think that it's a good game, and I think that there's interesting things that it's trying and some new things that's bringing to the table. If I were going to toss a score at it, I would be in that 7.5 range, which to me on my personal scale is like good. And I'm happy to have spent time with it. I do think that a lot of the other pieces that we brought up from a critique standpoint throughout the episode hold true, but I'm proud to have played it at least. I think it's been an interesting conversation to try and pull some of that apart.
You guys think you're going to remember the name of this game in a year?
No.
I forgot to get into this.
I can hardly remember the name as it is.
Is it a good name or a bad name, or is the name just neutral and the game kind of makes whether the name is good or not?
I feel like Craig and I summed it up earlier where we kept on calling it Legends of Aveum instead of Immortals of Aveum.
Craig. Shame on you.
Just
Ren brought this to the table, not me. Sorry, Ren.
I'm just saying that I don't mind it. It just doesn't feel like it has enough oomph.
Yeah.
Aveum, like I said earlier, like the names and everything seems cool, but the title of the game just doesn't work. I think like maybe The Rise of the Triarchs, or like I don't know, Revenge of Sandrak. I don't know. There really could have been anything that really ties it more together, because I don't think anybody even remembers that Aveum is the name of this world that we're in.
It just makes you think of birds. I wonder what some of the working titles were for this.
I do too. I agree that I don't think it's a great name. I don't think it's very memorable. There's so many things that are like something of something. And it's not one that to me sticks out as being like, oh, remember that? You honestly probably could have gone with just like Aveum. All right, like I don't know what that is, but the Immortals of doesn't really add anything except add like a fairly generic front word.
And it just adds more confusion, because even in the game they're like, well, we're not really immortal. It's just the name that we have.
That is true.
It was so annoying. It's like, just tell me what you mean.
That is true. All right. Well, before we return to our 20 questions, let's talk about some big picture AAA themes. So first of all, the first segment I want to bring to this season is how squeaky is the leather? Did you guys notice that there was a fair amount of leather squeaking sound effects? I've played 3 AAA games this year so far, and they all have big protagonist leather squeak energy.
Is it leather squeak or is it footsteps?
I noticed more footsteps.
No, I feel like when you're moving around, your clothes like rustle, and it feels like they're all using the same sound effect library for this. Like,
To be fair, I didn't play with headphones.
Oh,
like
yeah.
I said, I played this just on open TV, but I did. I mean, I have a sound bar. I cranked that bitch up. I don't have roommates. So, yeah, I don't think I really noticed that, but there definitely was lots of atmospheric sounds that were good. Don't think I noticed a leather squeak, though.
Atmospheric Leather is the name of my new early morning come down club for leather daddies.
Immortals of Atmospheric Leather.
I want to talk about kind of violence as a theme in AAA gaming. I think there's this idea out there that video games are violent, and I think a lot of that comes from the kind of top end of gaming. Maybe not. I'm not sure. So I kind of want to talk about how violence is used in each game, and specifically like plot critical violence. Like, is the only way that this media object can see a solution to conflicts between people violence? And in this game, ultimately at the end, yes, but I think there's a lot of like, I mean, I'd love to know how you guys feel about this, but to me, this game didn't go as far that way as other games that I've played. Like, there was a lot of attempts at communication, reparations, that sort of thing. And only when people were like kind of reasonably regarded as like unchanging in their viewpoints did violence have to be used as an option. What do you guys kind of think about how like violence shows up here?
I feel like it's one of those tropes that maybe gaming doesn't know how to stray from, or doesn't feel safe strafing from. I feel like there is a lot of popularity with shooting games. I mean, like, look at the free-to-play games like Fortnite and things like that. There's clearly something within violence that draws us to it. Is it necessary? I don't know 100%. I've never made a game. I don't know. But it does feel interesting that it is such a repetitive thing. Yeah, I'm even trying to think of like a Nintendo counterpart, but even some Mario games can be violent if you think about it.
Every Mario game's violent.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult to really justify it by saying that a kid's title is more or less violent than a AAA, whatever, AA, I don't care. Anyways, yeah, it feels like this kind of argument that we're used, it's like, oh, well, it's like a metaphor for the human condition, like we're always drawn to violence, and it's like, well, that's because it's what's being put out there.
Yeah, I have more thoughts on that as the season goes on, I suspect.
Yeah,
I'll be interesting kind of as we do track that over time, because it's a difficult question to answer, because I think like broadly, like what mediums are not interacting with violence as one of their primary like contributions into like culture, right? When you think about whether that's movies, television shows, games, books, right? Like violence acts as a central mechanism for many of those. And of course there are exceptions to the rule. And I'm not even confident enough within this first episode to say that is a rule, but it depends on like how far down you want to take the term violence as well.
Right.
Because to the point of like Mario, sure, like by the end of the game you are like punching or jumping on top of enemies and smashing them out of existence, right? Like you could take that to a logical extreme. If you go into sports, like that is a version of a combat arena in some ways.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know if you would. Yeah. So it's one of the things where like you can really stretch or collapse inwards. I do think that one of the things that this game doesn't offer you, and is something that I think is worth the observation, is around like the mechanics of action in which you can make decisions. Like games pride themselves on being a place where the user has interaction and choice over how they like affect that action, right? And that is something that is different to the medium. And in movies or television or books, you do see attempts at reconciliation that might not end up in violence. And in most games, and including here, and I think this is what you're hinting at, is your only like mechanism of action is usually violence without any other ways to work around that. And I think that's to some a restriction of what the medium has inflicted upon itself, but I do think that there's also a cost to generating a different outcome as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The
game's
core loop is violence, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, it would, yeah. So how you introduce that is something that I will be like observing across games, and I'm not sure. It'd be interesting to intersperse some of the season with some indie games, because I'm not sure that the budget or the size and scope of a game, I don't know if that's truly impacted whether violence is a primary mechanism or not. Yeah, I mean, certainly there are tons of low-budget violent games as well, but it does seem like we have the perception, or systems have been polished such that violent systems are the ones that are the highest, that are placed in the highest budget art objects. Whether that's because those systems have received the most polish, or because other systems aren't seen to be as prestigious, or my personal view is that, like, well, yeah, we'll get more into it, but that is a very interesting. It would be very interesting to crunch the numbers somehow if that were possible.
Yeah, and I do think that you hit the nail on the head, right? Like the gameplay loop, like combat offers a lot of variations within a confine. And if you're trying to develop something at scale, having that option available to you is probably quite beneficial.
We already talked about the architecture segment, but I think we're going to come back to kind of when it comes to high fidelity representations of the built environment, how creative people are approaching that. Where are they getting their ideas? How are we deciding what to represent when we have to represent it? It's something that you can like walk up to and interface with. I think that'll be interesting to see over this season.
I'll pick up an architecture book to keep up.
That's right. I'll send you 500 pounds of suggestions.
We need to link in the podcast notes, like necessary reading materials for the Emotive Pixels podcast.
That's right. I listen to this podcast in our time, and he begins every episode by saying, and there's a reading list to go with it, which is, I always feel like only a certain kind of person finds that welcoming. We have a couple miscellaneous topics that I think we're going to iron out into more specific ones as we go along here. We have creativity applied to AAA versus indie games. Craig, do you have something you want to say about that?
I think we've circled the drain on that one in some capacity, where I'm not sure what that looks like, but I think one of the things that is commonly said is that, indies is where interesting creative or like new ideas are brought in, and AAA is where they get polished. And maybe you could extrapolate that if we want to make like a tech analogy to like Android versus Apple, or someone versus Apple, where other people will bring ideas in, and then someone else will provide a requisite level of polish that then feeds it out to the broader mass.
It's interesting because these days, or in this very specific time, post-pandemic and post-engine consolidation that we're in, I almost feel like this game's a great example for this particular thought, because I don't think like the fidelity here is part of the value proposition. The environment, the amount of budget they had for lore building, the voice acting, the Hollywood actors, like, so I before this episode, I would have said, no, there is plenty of innovation in AAA, but what it sounds like is actually the truth is that AA is where like concepts can be introduced that then flow up. Whereas indies are, I still kind of think, operating in their own world. Like maybe some of the like systems will trickle up, but like when you think about some of the greatest indie hits in the last decade, like your Stardew Valleys, like how is Stardew Valley implemented or affected AAA? Like maybe you could say the Dragon Age thing, but Dragon Age was doing that before Stardew, so
Animal Crossing, maybe there's some transference.
It's like,
Be curious if the next one has something more. Yeah, that's one of those places where I think that maybe there's a wrap up episode by the end of the season also where we come back to some of these pieces, because I think that is
it's a good idea.
It's and it's also like, do these things flow downstream too, right? Like, because this AA space where the fidelity and accessibility to create a game that would appear to be AA, and don't get me wrong, like there's obviously millions and millions of dollars poured into this that an individual developer won't, but yeah, what is the transference both up and downstream of the industry at large?
I really like this one. What does this game's success or failure say about the industry, if anything? We could probably talk a long time about this. We could say something really complicated, or we could say the name's not good, dog. I don't really know what.
The name's not good. It came out a week after Baldur's Gate and like the week before Skyrim, and on the same day as Armored Core. Like, it's a bad time.
Yeah. This is.
I mean, before Nate messaged me about this game, I hadn't heard of it.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I think also says a lot about it. I wouldn't say I'm like blind to the game announcement sphere, but it just I think also it being an EA Play game, I don't know if it's actually on Game Pass or if it's just EA Play, but it just feels like its level of accessibility maybe just didn't really reach as far as they thought it did.
I will say that I played it on PS Plus is where it ended up making it into my world.
That's awesome.
And so I'm guessing it probably is on Game Pass, but they found much more success. And they mentioned this specifically, that like after they released a trial that had like a couple hours that you could play before buying it, like they had a way higher attach rate than EA typically saw with people buying through, which I think does speak also to, it's a game that I don't think does very well when you look at it, but like when you play it, you grok it, you understand it better. So I think it's something having in your hands is helpful. And they also did a discount because it launched this is a $69.99 game. Like this launched as a $70 full price thing, and their sales dramatically increased when they did 50% off sales. So like deep cuts. And I have a question of, what of a $39.99, the $40 price tag, would that have meaningfully shifted their numbers? I think there's probably a bunch of contributing factors here.
Yeah, I headed into this episode more bummed by this game's like lack of success than I actually came out with, because I think I think it just got fiscal quartered, like.
Yeah,
I think it got shut down at the worst time. Maybe it doesn't have the best name, but like, I think I'm not gonna say executives are great, deep, creative, loving people, but I think EA knows when they do this to a game to not read too much into its lack of success.
Yeah, I will say that one additional piece from the development is like, I believe the original release date was July. And the developers made the choice to hold. They had release date decision, and they said they would rather put out a game that was more polished and up to their quality standards. Like they took the classic Nintendo approach of like,
did they know this was going to be the week?
Good game. Yeah, and then I think they just like they pushed, and so they're like, one of the things that that they looked back on, their CEO did at least, was like, if we would have landed in that January, February slot, what could that have looked like? But for him, he was like, I'm running a studio with a ton of people, and is the cost that it will to like have people sit around for 4 months or continue to work on it for 4 months, can I make that back up in sales? Which is a really interesting like if you're running out of money, you just eventually have to go. And I think
Yeah.
that's a little bit of what happened here. But there is something about the game failing to gain traction. It's a bummer, especially when it is like taking a shot in a new IP, new direction, and people are constantly like, "Oh, I want new IP. Stop giving me sequels." And it's like, well, they did that, and you didn't show up.
Yeah. Yeah. It almost makes me think of like with games that I can't remember the name of the studio. Animal Well is the game.
Mm-hmm.
What's his face?
It literally
Donkey.
Donkey, his studio. But it's like that literally is an indie game studio that's getting just as much attention with their game that is a new IP as these other studios. So for me, I feel like it's more of a failure on the
Publisher.
the publisher versus the studio. I feel like the studio, obviously, they put their name to it because they were proud of it, but the numbers aren't going to look at pride.
Yeah.
Donkey has such an advantage having a stream. Like, he's so much more naturally in touch with the consumer base than EA is at this point.
Right.
I think also, like, if you advertise this game, it looks dorky.
Yeah,
like,
it
you know, like if you saw a trailer for this in the middle of the Super Bowl, I can almost like envision this in my head. You'd be like, wow, you know, maybe it looks interesting, but I think it looks kind of dorky. Yeah.
Also, if your brain is destroyed by internet culture like mine, you see Devin and you see Ethan Klein from H3H3, and you're like, oh no.
Who is that?
Yeah, it's okay. He's just an internet personality.
An internet person?
He has a podcast. Isn't that cool?
That seems pretty
Do
cool.
you think that more people should have
is
podcasts?
pretty cool.
You get a podcast. You get a podcast. You get a podcast. Ren, what did you learn about AAA games by playing this?
I learned that not all AAA games are bad at launch. That
That's a very good point.
I learned that this game was very expensive, but I played it through EA Play, so I did not purchase it for full price. I think the biggest draw of this game is that new IPs really do have a place. It's just a matter of the developers or the publishers really putting the time and effort into it too, which I think is the biggest issue.
Yeah. I think my big learning here was, I kind of hinted at in the previous topic, which is kind of like, I think it's easy to read these stories of these games failing and be really bummed out and almost judgmental. Like, well, that didn't work. And actually getting your hands on it and playing it, like, I feel a lot more proud for the developers instead of that kind of like mixture of pity and other negative feelings that I think you can feel if you just read the headlines. This is a cool game. They should be proud of making it. I think it's cool as hell that they got to choose to delay. That gamble did not pay off in the sense of that's a tough week to release, but this is really a neat thing. And I'm sure, despite all the capitalism bullshit and layoffs, like, the people involved in this will be, well, I hope this isn't a Shadow of Mordor situation, but I feel like we're going to see some of this again at some point.
Yeah, I think
I definitely hope the studio comes back. Like, as much as I personally didn't feel the game was for me, I feel like there's absolutely an audience for this game.
Yeah.
I'm glad they got to put it out. Like, I'm glad that this wasn't something where it like just kind of limped out and someone looked at it on the budget sheet and was like, we'll take a loss. That is where it's a benefit that this came from an independent studio to try and push through it.
Yeah. All right. And last but not least, do you guys think this is a cult classic? Think it's got a legacy?
I don't. Sorry.
No.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't think it has enough oomph to really put it in cult classic territory. And that's coming from someone who is obsessed with everything David Lynch.
I think it'll be destined to be one of those games that you look cool by knowing, but you're going to forget the name when you try to bring it up, so it's not going to really make you look all that cool.
Remember that fantasy like
gonna...
shooter, but wasn't a shooter, but you like had the spells, but they were kind of like guns, but weren't exactly.
It was like a Legends of Avian, right?
Something about birds?
Yeah.
I really don't
birds. Something about immoral birds.
Yeah, the immoral bird game.
Immoral of Avian.
What, Wash's wife? Is that the... Yeah.
I hope that it's one of those games that we look back on and it inspired something else that gets to reference back to it.
I was about to say that I hope that even the developers who made this game go on to future projects and like hint at it, and maybe in that way it'll get more attention back to it, like the Suda51 games.
Yeah,
it's like, oh yeah, we're referencing this game.
There's a Gears of War one day that gets to look back at Kill Switch, and there's something else one day that looks back at the Birds of Avian or something. Immortals of Aveum. That's it.
I don't know what Kill Switch is.
Oh, Kill Switch was a third-person like cover mechanic game before Gears of War, and like
PSP? No,
PS2, I think.
PS2. Okay.
Yeah. So, and it was kind of the first game that like did that like bump up over the shoulder piece.
Oh.
So definitely inspired that pretty heavily, but I don't think many people remember it.
All right. Well, we have gone over 2 hours, which is impressive. So let us end this podcast with our 20s. Mine was, what is AA? What is AAA? Is fantasy better as games than books? Am I in Romania? Wait, no. Italy? Craig?
Mine was Spartan kicked out of the sales charts. Its fate was decided. The ever war continues, yet our war has just begun.
What's the Spartan kicked? I thought for sure it was like around a Halo thing.
Oh no, Spartan kick was from the movie 300, and it's like that very strong kick directly into someone's chest, and then they go, well, in 300 they go flying into a wall, but in this, I can't remember who does it, but or it might have been Jax does it, and then like Spartan kicks the guy right off the platform.
Okay,
I was like, dope, hell yeah.
And Ren?
My super dry 20 is a graphically beautiful game with overwhelming potential and inspiration from great predecessors, ruined by generational humor and overcomplication of gameplay.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for joining us on the first episode of Season 5 of Emotive Pixels. And hey, wait, before you go, send us an email. pod@emotivepixels.games. Let us know you're listening. Let us know how much you love AAA gaming. And yeah, until next time, have a great night.
Bye.